Hello. I think I've gone live now. YouTube was not behaving for me. I just got a going live and the circle of death in the middle of the screen just going round and round and round. But yes, I'm here. I don't know whether something exciting was going on with the football and I just couldn't go live. I don't know. But I hope you can see and hear me. Can I just ask if you can see me and hear me? Hi, Sophia. Hi, Gaslight Studios. Oh, I've got lots and lots of people here from all over the place. UK, where have we got? Fair Lawn, California, Taiwan, Virginia, Chicago, Canada, Connecticut, India. That I'm talking to you wherever you are in the world, all over the world. So thank you for joining me. I'm sure that you all actually know southern Spain is very hot at this time of the year anyway, but we're super, super hot at the moment. So I've got the fan on above me and yes, I'm sweltering. It is telling me that my connection is unstable. So I don't know whether you're there or not and whether I'm here or not, but we'll carry on. So yes, very, very hot. Yes, you can tell me if the football scores, if you like. I'm not really into football, but it is interesting to know because obviously I am English. Anyway, Claire Ridgway, as you probably know, I run this YouTube channel and I've written a fair few Tudor history books, and on the 1st of August, the assistant curator there and castle historian, we're very excited. It's about the Boleyns of Hever Castle. The Boleyns, of course, being my very favourite subject and Owen's favourite subject as well, and Hever Castle being my happy place. So do feel free to say where you're from, tell me the football schools, and ask questions about the Boleyn family. So yes, please do keep it to the Boleyn family this time. Yeah, I'll do different subjects for other lives, but we'll try and keep on the Boleyn family tonight, the extended Boleyn family as well. So I just went through as I was getting on, and the YouTube wasn't playing ball. I wrote down a few questions that some of you had asked. I'm buffering terribly, apparently. I'm so sorry. I don't know. There's obviously glitches on the internet tonight, so I'm sorry I'm buffering, but I haven't got any other internet way of talking to you. Bandit Queen asked, 1-0, is it? Thank you. Bandit Queen asked about the date of Mary Boleyn's relationship with King Henry VIII and what we know about it, and why do I date it differently to some other historians. There are several historians that date it to 1522 purely because of Henry VIII coming out at the Shrovetide joust with a motto sort of about unrequited love. But jousts always had sort of themes, chivalric themes, and even if it was about the women at court that he was having a courtly love flirtation with at the time, it doesn't have to be Mary. Then we have the fact other historians also date it to the 1520s because of the grants that William Carey was getting at the time. But having gone through the grants that are all listed in letters and papers, William Carey wasn't at all unusual. If you say that those grants point to Henry VIII being the father of the Carey children who were born in 1524 and 1526, then you might as well say that Henry VIII fathered quite a few of his privy chamberers' wives' children, because all of his close servants, privy chamberers, were getting grants at the time. You know, for example, Henry Norris. Men like Francis Weston were favoured by the king. We only know that they had a sexual relationship at one point because of the fact, Tim's coming to sort out the fan. We only know that they had a relationship at one point because Henry actually applied for a dispensation, thank you, a dispensation to marry Anne Boleyn first degree, so sister or mother. I date it to around 1519, but this is just speculation because I think it was probably like Bessie Blount's relationship with Henry VIII, that once he tired of her, he provided a good match for her. So I think once of Mary, he set up a good match with one of his gentlemen. She got married in 1520, February 1520, to William Carey. So I think Henry VIII had finished with her by that point. 1519 would make sense because that's when Bessie Blount was pregnant with Henry Fitzroy. So Henry VIII might have wanted a replacement for her. So those are just my musings on the topic, but we haven't got a clue. I mean, Eric Ives quite rightly said that what we know, and this is know for a fact, about Mary Boleyn would be written on a postcard with room to spare. We just hardly know anything about her at all. So thank you for that question. Sorry about the very long answer, but it's quite complicated. Greeley asked about direct descendants of the Boleyn family. Are there any direct descendants left today? Well, you need to have a look for my, I think I've done a couple of videos on this about the royal family, our present royal family in the UK, being descended from the Boleyns. Our present Queen Elizabeth II, has sort of one line of descent. She's also descended from Margaret Tudor, by the way, the Scottish line, but she's descended from the Boleyns through Mary Boleyn and the Careys. Princes William and both of Mary Boleyn's children, Henry and Catherine Carey, because their mother, Diana Spencer, of course, Diana, Princess of Wales, her Spencer family were descended from the Careys as well. And there are lots and lots of Boleyn descendants today because Mary Boleyn's children, Henry and Catherine, had large families, and then their children had large families, and so on and so on. So there are so many people that have got Boleyn blood today. Jennifer asked about Anne Boleyn and Catherine Howard being first cousins, which is correct. Catherine was the daughter of Edmund Howard, Elizabeth Boleyn's brother. She was Elizabeth Howard before she got married. There's a big age difference between Anne Boleyn and Catherine Howard. Anne Boleyn being born sort of 1501 or 1507, whichever one you go with, and Catherine being born in the 1520s. We don't know anything about any kind of relationship between the two of them, just that they were first cousins. So no glimpses into their relationship. One J, thank you so much. Number one fan, thank you. It's so lovely that yes, people all around the world follow my channel. It's rather humbling. Very difficult to hear, Enrico says. The audio is like button, and yes, our internet's pretty good, but yes, I think there are probably glitches with YouTube as well. So I do apologise for any buffering. An audiobook purely because it's got over 65 illustrations, taking you on a sort of guided tour of sort of Hever, the Hever that the Boleyns knew. We're taking you back in time. We're time travelling to the castle as the Boleyns knew, and it's very, very vision and order. Instead of the incest charge being laid at the feet of Thomas Boleyn. That's an interesting question. I think Thomas Boleyn was very well respected at court. He started his court career in the reign of King Henry VII, which is why it is a load of rubbish, to put it politely, that he needed to push his daughters. He was a royal favourite before Henry VIII came to the throne. He was well on the rise. So I think he's got a very, very good reputation. And I think it was easier as well to accuse George of incest because the proof, as Shapra said, that others have said as well, that was the only proof used against them, was that George had spent time with her alone. George, I think, also would have fought tooth and nail for Anne if he'd been sort of left alive. And I think also the fact that George, Anne and Jane had all chatted about the king's sexual problems, and also Anne and George had been said apparently to have joked about the king's dress and his poetry, and that's so it was payback time, I think, and it was easier to point it to George. Maz also asked, did everything but to the crown? Thank you, Shan, thank you so much. You had Elizabeth dying first in 1538 and Thomas died in 1539. Thomas Boleyn. Some of them went to Mary Boleyn. Hever went to his brother Sir James Boleyn, but within a month of him actually taking control of it, which he took control of it in, I think, February 1540, within a month, March 1540, he'd swapped Hever. He'd done an exchange for some property lands in Norfolk with the Hever, and then passed the lease on, granted the lease to Anne of Cleves after the annulment. She didn't, well, Chantal's asking, why is Hever Castle so well taken care of, but a lot of Henry VIII's palaces are not here anymore? But there are, the Tower of London that Henry used is still around. We've got Hampton Court Palace. Hever is in a place where it didn't get involved in sort of any of the kind of the Civil War trouble. It wasn't slighted. It wasn't in one of those places. It was privately owned. It was crown owned for a time. Mary the family's private ownership. So it did at times go into dilapidated states, but private ownership meant that it was it was taken care of. Let's have a look what else we've got. Michaela asked, did Elizabeth know her surviving Boleyn relatives well after 1530? She died in April 1538. Thomas died in March 1539. Mary Boleyn died in July 1543. Elizabeth was still very young when those Boleyn relatives died. Thomas did see her at Prince Edward's christening, the future Edward VI, his christening at Hampton Court Palace in October 1537. Thomas went to Edward's christening and Elizabeth was present. So at least Thomas visited by Mary Boleyn, for example. We don't even know whether Mary was in the country. She might well have gone to Calais, seeing as her husband William Stafford was a soldier at the garrison. We just don't know where she was. But Elizabeth's pre-accession household, Champernowne, who we know as Cat Ashley or Astley, her husband John, Blanche Parry thing. There were various members of her household, very trusted members, who were Boleyn relatives. So Elizabeth was surrounded by people that could tell her about her mother and her mother's family, thankfully. Teresa or Therese asked about, did Henry Persian want to marry? Yes, we know from the records that there was a romance and that they planned on getting married. And was it stopped because of Henry or because Anne was not suitable? Well, you do have the idea that George Wyatt puts forward about I think it was George Wyatt and George Cavendish puts forward about, but writing with hindsight that it was George Cavendish, Wolsey's gentleman usher, that the king had instructed light as to sort of what happened to his writings later. There was no suggestion at the time that the king really was interested in her, and Anne had been brought back to England to marry James Butler, a relation of her paternal grandmother, the Butler family of Ormond of Kilkenny Castle. And Percy was supposed to be marrying someone that was of a higher status than Anne. Anne was of the gentry status. Henry Percy was the son and heir of Wolsey and his father. He was very quickly married off to the daughter of the Earl of Shrewsbury, Mary Talbot, and Anne was sent back to Hever Castle, where apparently she sulked for a while, which she would. Her heart had been broken. Annette wants to know more about the people executed inside the Tower of London. Why were they buried inside the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula, which of course is a chapel royal if they were traitors? Only people that were of a certain Vincula as well. Margaret Pole, John Dudley, Duke of Northumberland, Edward Seymour, the Earl of Duke of Somerset, Earl of Hertford. These are important people. George Boleyn, Lord Rochford. So they were honoured, even though they were traitors. They still needed a proper burial. Men like Francis Weston, Henry Norris, William Britt and Mark Smeaton were buried in the churchyard outside. So not as prominent, not as important, but they still needed a proper religious burial. Michaela asked, what if Anne hadn't miscarried? And that goes as well. Sophia asked, what if Elizabeth, she miscarried a fetus of around about 3.5 months in gestation, and that it was said to have been a boy. If she'd gone on to have that baby, it had been healthy, surviving, then I think she would have been safe. It would have been the heir that Henry VIII wanted. Whether or not they would have been happy, whether or not Henry still would have had sort of his flirtation with Jane Seymour and had her as a mistress, we don't know. Sure, Anne would have been safe, having given him a son and heir. As long as that prince lived, I think she would have been safe. That miscarriage made her very vulnerable. Christine said that she enjoyed the video about the royal family descended from Mary Boleyn. Thank you very much. Sheila wants to know about the book. Do I recommend a book on the letters that Henry VIII wrote to Anne Boleyn, and how did they end up in the Vatican? There's this little book that you can find on Amazon, Love Letters of Henry VIII to Anne Boleyn. It's got sort of transcripts of them. You can also get them online. Archive.org has got the Harleian Miscellany, which has got them in the original French as well. I've got this German book, which I can't remember whether I got it from Abe Books or Amazon, but it's on the letters of Henry VIII to Anne Boleyn, and it's actually got, I'm trying to find a picture. It's illustrated of the letters along with a transcript as well. That is a beautiful book. I've used that a lot. How did they end up in the Vatican? Well, it's good that they did, because we've got them. I think they would have been destroyed otherwise. The idea is that they were stolen by an agent of the Pope, a Catholic papal agent, to prove that Henry VIII's annulment was actually about him being in love with Anne and wanting to replace Catherine with Anne, rather than it being his conscience, and all about Leviticus and that. So their idea is that they were stolen for the Pope so that the papacy had proof of that. And thank goodness and related. Right, let me have a look through. Those are the questions that I managed to write down. Let me have a look. I'm so glad that you can hear me loud and clear. Thank you. You are live, but you must have slow internet. Well, it's not too bad, but yes, living up a mountain does have its downside sometimes. Oh, lots of people all over the world. Yes, you can tell me people saying, can they tell me about scores, the football scores? Yes, you can. Sophia, did Anne Boleyn and her siblings have a close relationship with their parents? We don't know the ins and outs of the personal relationships. We don't have diaries. I mean, we just have that letter really that Anne Boleyn wrote when she was at Margaret of Austria's court to her father, just apologising for her French, and it's a very sweet letter. And the fact that it was kept, I think Lauren McKight it being a treasured possession. I think the fact that Thomas Boleyn educated Anne, and therefore probably Mary, to a high standard, something that was generally left for boys' education, shows that he really wanted to give his daughters opportunities. That doesn't always mean love. But yes, I mean, we don't know the ins and outs, but sure, the Boleyns were completely grief-stricken at what happened in 1536. I always get emotional when I visit Hever Castle. I think of their time there in the months after Anne and George's executions, how awful that must have been. And I can just imagine that some kind of separation between her and her family. Obviously, she was banished in 1534 from court, and her family were furious that she'd gone her own way. You know, she was the Queen's sister. She'd gone her own way and had a secret marriage and was pregnant. But I think the fact that she did inherit the sort of the property and that from Lady Margaret Butler after her death, I think there had been some kind of reconciliation then. Ashley asks, what's your opinion on why Anne went to Europe for her education and Mary didn't get to go? Yeah, that is an interesting one. I put it down to Thomas seeing something in Anne which made her more suitable. But we just don't know. Margaret of Austria was very pleased with Anne, thought she was bright for her age. She was very pleased with her. So perhaps Anne had that spark. Perhaps she'd done well in the tutoring that she'd received at home in the years leading up to that. Perhaps there was just something about Anne which Thomas, you know, he couldn't ask for places for both his daughters. He was already asking for a favour. So perhaps there was just something in Anne, a spark in Anne. That's what I think, but speculation. No. Oh, it would be so good to know. It'd be so good to find, you know, a family Bible that's hidden in the walls of Hever. I'll have to get Owen to do some more, you know, searching. Wouldn't it be good if Thomas Boleyn had been like Sir Francis Knowles, Catherine Carey's husband, and written the births of his children in a family dictionary? Because although, you know, I think a young girl could have gone off to Mary Tudor's household when she became Queen of France and being kept on by Queen Claude, but we can argue both sides with the primary sources. We could say, oh, she must have been born in July on St. Anne's Day, you know, because she's named Anne, but then she had aunts called Anne. So, you know, you generally were named after your godmother and family relatives, and that's, so we can't even say that. So no, we don't know. Thank you for the donations that are coming through. I've just had another one that is so kind. Thank you very much. I'm very humbled when people do that. Let's have a look. Where have I got to? Now I've just lost my train comments. Let's have a look. What other questions? So yes, thank you, BB and Carrie Schneider. Carrie says, do you think Henry VIII had syphilis? No, I don't. No, there's no evidence that he had syphilis. We've got his medical expenses. We know what he was treated with and was treated with it. He didn't, his symptoms aren't that of syphilis. There's no writings or records suggesting he had syphilis. So no, I think that's a kind of a victory. Oh, hello, from Shirley, West Midlands, Bernadette. Oh, I did a teaching practice in Shirley when I was training to be a teacher. So hi, Bernadette. How many letters are still around that Henry wrote down? Oh, there's 7. BB says, did Elizabeth have strong memories of her mother? No, I would doubt it. Elizabeth was born in September 1533. Her mother died in May 1536. And Elizabeth was in her own household for a lot of that time, which was the done thing. Anne did visit her, sent instructions, got very much involved as much as she could, but she would not have had strong memories of her mother at all. But contrary to myth, Elizabeth didn't shy away from her mother's memory. She used her falcon badge. She had an image of Anne in her coronation procession. She supported the works like treatises and biographies of her mother. The portraits that we have of Anne were painted during her reign. She definitely supported the rehabilitation of her mother. I don't know, I've never actually seen anything that was at the time about Anne. Now, unless they've watched the Tudors, my general sort of friends in rural Spain have heard of her, but they don't really know much about her. They've heard of Catalina de Aragon, Catherine of Aragon, being the daughter of the famous Reyes Católicos, the everywhere of them. But no, I don't know what they think of Anne. Did Henry VIII ever go to Hever Castle? Well, we've got sort of Victorian engravings of him going to Hever. Yeah, he definitely went down to the area when he was courting Anne Boleyn. He would have gone to Hever, but I doubt, even though there's a Henry VIII bedroom, which is just a few miles down the road, that property that had belonged to the Duke of Buckingham, that then went, Thomas Boleyn ended up being keeper of Penshurst. I'm sure he would have a house, a crenellated sort of manor house. So Penshurst would have been more suitable for a king who obviously brought attendant with him as well. So he would have visited Hever, but he would have stayed probably at Penshurst. Maz said there's often this idea that Norfolk was uncaring of the fates of the children. Do we have any truth? Do we actually have any truth to this? It's hard to know. We know that Norfolk wept as he pronounced their sentences. I don't know whether those are crocodile tears or whether they were real tears. That's really, really hard to know. But surely sentencing your niece and nephew, your courtship, with very involved in the great matter, and that it's so hard to know. So it's not like he was distant. He knew Anne very well. So yeah, very hard to know. That's the thing. We don't get people's personal feelings. We only get things written about them. So it's really, really hard to know. Laurie is asking, is it true that Thomas Boleyn never got along with his brother-in-law, the 3rd Duke of Norfolk, even before Norfolk presided at Anne and George's trial? They worked together. I haven't seen any evidence or dislike, really. I'm not sure that Thomas was keen on the whole idea of Anne marrying the title of the earldom of Ormond in Ireland, which Thomas was fighting for with the Butlers. Pierce Butler felt it was his by right, and Thomas thought it was his by right through his grandfather, who had died. And the whole idea was that if Anne married James Butler, Pierce Butler's son, Thomas Boleyn would therefore not get it. So I think there must have been, probably Thomas wasn't very happy about that. It does sound as if the Duke of Norfolk, well, he's kind of, in the records it said that it seems to have been sort of his idea, this marriage match. So I'm not sure that Thomas was very pleased with him over that. But you don't get a lot about their sort of personal relationship. Obviously, people like them, the Boleyns and the Howards, people to the king, were all working together to try and get the king his annulment, so that he could marry Anne. So everyone had to work together. Paris says George and Jane were married a long time, and while we know there were no known offspring, did Jane do Anne Boleyn's 1534 pregnancy? There are a few mentions of her having a heavily pregnant, and then that just disappears from the records. And yet she was queen. So Jane Boleyn wasn't that important. She was the queen's sister-in-law, but she wasn't that important. There's no mention in any of the records of pregnancies, miscarriages, stillbirths, but then she wouldn't be mentioned. Perhaps she had problems, or George had problems. We don't know. No evidence that their marriage was unhappy. I think the fact that she sent him a message of comfort when he was in power and he gave thanks, the fact that Anne, George and Jane all spoke together about the king's sexual problems, shows sort of a confidence there, a trust, an unhappy marriage, which people obviously look at the fact that it was childless to kind of argue therefore it was unhappy. But we all know people that try in these days of where you can get medical help, that try and can't have children. My thoughts on Jane, Lady Rochford. Kim Wiggins asked for my thoughts. I think it's sad that she has become so maligned, so blackened. We've rehabilitated Anne by bringing down Jane Boleyn. Fiction has had so much power in that respect, and so has some non-fiction. There is absolutely no evidence that Jane did anything to bring down the Boleyns. There were no witnesses produced. Or Elizabeth Brown, the Countess of Worcester, Nan Cobham, and one other unnamed lady. Jane is not mentioned apart from the fact that George was given this note told not to read in his court case, and it was about Anne Boleyn confiding in Jane, and then Jane talking to him about the king's problems in the bedroom. So no, I think she's been badly maligned, probably with the hindsight of looking at what happened with Catherine Howard and her involvement there. Again, I think she's been badly maligned then. Did she just want to see two people happy because she'd helped them once, and that was therefore misprision of treason, so she might as well go on? Cromwell was dead by this point, a man that she'd sort of sought help from in the past. Who could she turn to about what was happening with the Queen? Did Elizabeth reward any of her half siblings who were illegitimate, says Emily? Well, Henry Fitzroy, the only acknowledged illegitimate sibling she had, died in 1536. The Carey children, I do not believe, were the king's. He didn't acknowledge them. There's no evidence that they were. The only evidence that people use are the grants. But then, as I said, William Carey was noted that they rose in Elizabeth's reign. Used. They were her cousins. Elizabeth really kept sort of her family sort of close. Did the same with the Howards as well. So I don't believe that Elizabeth really had half siblings who were illegitimate. Ethelreda Malt. There is a suggestion that she might have been the king's. I think she's the one. I think yes, she could be. But yeah, we're not sure. But no, I don't believe the Careys were. I think Elizabeth, her cousins. Phil Crawford, I forgot where was Anne killed. Anne Boleyn was given an execution, a private execution within the Tower of London confines. Her brother and the other men were executed on Tower Hill. But Anne, like Catherine Howard, like Queen Jane, Lady Jane Grey, they were important people and executed within the town confines where spectators could be more sort of controlled. Is there any official record of Thomas More's personal opinion of Anne Boleyn, says Rachel? No, I think he was very careful in what he said. He even, he resigned from his post as Lord Chancellor because he didn't want to upset the king, offend the king. When he saw that the king was going in a direction that he was going in, the whole supremacy and that. Thomas, of course, he was made to share his views in the end. I do apologise if I'm missing anyone's questions out. And now my comments have frozen, so I can't even read them. Perhaps I'll come back to life soon. Let's have a look. Wendy, do you live in hope, like I do, that a contemporary likeness of Anne Boleyn will be discovered in an attic somewhere? Yes, I do. I would love that. I mean, we know that a contemporary painting was still around as late as sort of the 1700s. We know that it was cut down because it got damaged, but it just disappears after that point. That was the one that was owned by Lord Lumley, I think, damaged, but it just disappears, and it's so annoying. It must be in a private collection somewhere, someone that doesn't want to talk about it, doesn't want it to be made public, or it's just got forgotten about and is in some archive, some attic, some bank vault or something, and people don't realize quite what they've got. But I would absolutely love for that to come to light. Paris saying, did the bee necklace actually exist, or was it just added to later to distinguish her? Having gone through Henry VIII's inventory, Henry VIII owned a lot of, and it was kind of the rage. It was in fashion at the time, and I think the fact that these portraits in Elizabeth's reign were all painted with the bee necklace on, I don't think that was just to distinguish sort of Anne. I think it was because it was connected to her. These portraits were painted in living memory. There were people at court that would have known Anne, who would have known if she hadn't worn a necklace like this. So I think its prominent use in portraits does point to Anne having owned it. Yes. Noli me tangere, Lord Lumley's painting covered in overpaint somewhere. It could well be, couldn't it? Some restoration work needs to be done on a painting somewhere, and perhaps it'll suddenly be Anne. Seen it from queen to queen. They were very good at recycling jewellery and clothing, and things would have got damaged and things would have got melted as well. A lot of things, obviously, like the crown jewels, sort of got damaged or obliterated during the Civil War. Carrie, thank you. What do you consider the most historically accurate movie, video, or show about Henry VIII's reign and marriages? Oh, that is so hard. I do like the 1970s series with Keith or Mitchell. Enjoyed that. Anne of the Thousand Days is my favourite Anne Boleyn one. Again, not completely accurate, but I do love Genevieve Bujold as Anne. In that, I think she brings Anne to life beautifully, and Richard Burton's a great Henry VIII as well. There aren't any that are historically accurate. So yeah, those two I would say are my picks. So yes. In Anne's downfall. Well, she definitely had a hand in Anne's downfall. How much of that was her choice, we don't know, but we do know from Eustace Chapuis, the imperial ambassador, that she was being coached in what to say to the king and how to behave with him, so to kind of keep him interested. She was told to tell the king that Anne was unpopular, that his marriage to Anne was unpopular. So if she did do those things, which I'm assuming she did, then she obviously played a part in in Anne's downfall. But how much choice did she have? How much was she a pawn? Was she on the side of Catherine of Aragon, and therefore she hated Anne and didn't care what happened to Anne's execution? So yeah, that's an interesting one. Definitely played a part, but I don't know how much of it was really down to her. Let's have a look. Yes, Letitia. Margaret Beaufort and Jane Boleyn are the two who've been terribly maligned in historical fiction. I mean, what is it about making Margaret Beaufort mad? Mad, yes. Why can't they just make these women sort of strong women without being mad? So yes, let's have a look. Was Thomas Boleyn, Gaslight Studios, was Thomas Boleyn politically neutral? His father seems to have been a reliable servant of both Richard III and Henry VII, as he was made a knight of the bath by Richard III and kept his head with Henry VII. A lot of courtiers managed to move from king to king, even when it was sort of the Wars of the Roses, managed to just move from one to another by sort of proving their royalty. Was Thomas Boleyn politically neutral? I think he was a good servant of the king. He served Henry VII to his best. He went on to serve Henry VIII to the best, perhaps not always agreeing with what he was doing. I think he was a good servant to the king. He was like other men of the time. Your job as a nobleman was to serve your king loyally, and Thomas Boleyn really did do that. Let's have a look. Eleanor, they weren't supposed to talk about Anne. That's interesting. Obviously, the butlers, they were their seat was Kilkenny Castle. They were the Irish. Thomas Butler and as well. Leigh says, why was Anne Boleyn killed? Well, we could boil it down to her not giving Henry VIII a son. I think he felt betrayed, let down. He'd moved heaven and earth to have her. He'd broken with the church, with Rome, the authority of Rome. He'd once been defender of the faith, and now he'd broken with Rome, turned the country upside down, caused unpopularity. Obviously, rebellion broke out in the end, but obviously after Anne. I think he felt very let down, and I think Anne was not backward in coming forward either. She was probably a difficult character too, and I think he just wanted to move on, as he had done with Catherine of Aragon. Jane Seymour was there in the wings. He wanted to move on. His priority was to have a son. Anne wasn't giving him one. He was going down the same route. He could see history repeating itself. Anne was going exactly like Catherine. The 1534 pregnancy, what happened to that? 1536 miscarriage. God obviously didn't like this marriage either. What was wrong? Well, it couldn't be him because he was God's anointed king. It must be Anne. Therefore, let's move on to Jane Seymour. Couldn't have Anne in the wings as Catherine of Aragon had been. Catherine of Aragon had caused trouble, had never accepted her new title of Dowager Princess, had, been figurehead, had divided people. People were on Catherine and Mary's side, or they were on Anne's side. He couldn't go through all again. I do believe that was down to Henry. I think Thomas Cromwell was to actual action. So that's me. Again, that's my... those are my views. Lindsay saying, was Anne's mother from a royal line at all? Yes, the Howards were from a royal line. All of Henry VIII's wives were actually descended from Edward III and therefore actually Edward I. So yes, and I have written an article about Anne's royal blood on the Anne Boleyn files. I'm not sure whereabouts it is. I can't remember even when I wrote it. But yes, about the lines of descent and her royal blood. But the Howards did have royal blood. So yes, that was what I was just saying. That I think she would have been too much trouble in the wings. She could have gone into exile. She could have gone to a convent. But I think Henry VIII was very aware that he'd had one wife causing trouble for years. He didn't want another one. Marriage to Jane, and any children that they had would be legitimate. There'd be no question over it. So therefore Anne had to be gone. She had to be dead. So my view. Any DNA from Henry VIII, asks Patricia. No one. I've never heard any sort of being disturbed and him being sort of tested. I mean, it would be wonderful, wouldn't it, sometime to know whether the Carey children were his children. But I also don't like tombs being disturbed just because of our curiosity. Perhaps if restoration is needed at Westminster Abbey, where the Careys are, or at George's Chapel, I think that gives an excuse, like when the Victorians had to do the work on St. Peter ad Vincula and Anne's body and various bodies were exhumed. I think testing in those cases where you've had to do an exhumation, I think that is appropriate then. But yeah, messing with tombs because of our curiosity doesn't quite sit well with me. So just my views again. So I think it's terrible. I'm so very sorry. But yeah, well, this has been absolutely lovely. Oh, more questions. Can I talk about the closest in time? I spoke to someone who did, but we've got quite a few. I really love my favourite contemporary sources tend to be the Chronicle by Charles Risley, who was Windsor Herald, and a herald's job was to record these kind of events. So he's one of my favourite. Charles Risley's Chronicle, that is contemporary. He was related to Thomas Risley, who was one of Henry VIII's close servants. And then I also like Edward Hall, Hall Chronicle as well. That's a contemporary source. He gives an account. Obviously, you've got Chapuis gives an account. But yeah, the chronicles I do love. I do rely on Charles Risley and Edward Hall a lot. Flash Reed says, can I talk a little about Henry VII's mother, Lady Margaret Beaufort? Now, I'm keeping this the Boleyn family, but yes, I do rather admire Lady Margaret Beaufort, and I do think she badly. Pauline's saying I could use a cup of hot tea. That she's saying she could use a cup of hot tea. I could not. I'm on the water because I am so, and I know tea's supposed to be refreshing, but I just can't have hot drinks in this weather. Emily, if Anne was alive today, what do you imagine her life would be like? Oh, I kind of, that sounds really silly, but I kind of picture her as a Michelle Obama. I don't know. Being involved in, I don't know, activism, politics. Yes. But I don't know why I feel like that. But yes, being sort of an activist, doing things to try and make the world better. So, Bandit Queen saying, spoilers here, but Italy beats England on penalties. There's going to be rather a lot of unhappiness in the UK over that. Sorry, everyone. Phil Crawford, yes, Anne was set up and she didn't do anything. Didn't you think Henry would have gotten tired of her? Well, there is this contemporary source that talks about him seeing these two ladies around court and him regretting marrying Jane so quickly. Yes, I think he would have got bored of her. I think he really liked strong women. Catherine of Aragon was a strong woman. Anne Boleyn was a strong woman. Catherine Parr later was a strong woman. I think he probably would have got bored with Jane, but she obviously gave him a son, so she would have been safe. So I expect the king would have taken mistresses. So yes. Oh, Michelle saying Bromsgrove. Well, I'm from Studley, so hello to you. And Beyond Healing saying thank you for my channel. Well, thank you for allowing me to have this channel. It's only because I actually have people tuning into it that I can carry on with it, and I do love any excuse. The Boleyns. Justine says I love Anne. Yes, I do. Anne's so fascinating, but I find her an incredibly fascinating lady, but that fascination for me also goes to her whole family. Amazing just finding out more about George, and what a talent he was, and how very sad that his life and dazzling career were cut short as well. And Thomas Boleyn as well. Mary and Elizabeth are very shadowy. Elizabeth Howard, Anne's mother, and Mary Boleyn, very shadowy. So that I find frustrating. I wish we knew more about them. But yes, well, it's coming up to is the hour. So yeah, apologies for the circle of death, as I call it. It has been really, really wonderful doing this, and I intend to do more of these live sessions, answering your questions. It's just great to talk Tudor and to know that there are people out there that want to listen to me ramble on about my favourite subject. So I don't know whether any of you are going to be at Hever Castle on the 1st of August, but I'm doing a talk with my co-author, Dr. Owen Emerson, about launching our book at Hever Castle. I mean, who could ever have predicted back when I began researching Anne Boleyn that I'd ever be launching a book at Hever Castle? So that's going to be amazing. Justine, did I see what you wrote? I saw the bit about you loving Anne Boleyn, but I'm sorry if I missed anything else out. So yes, if you're going to Hever, but if you're not going to be there, I think there are chances of it, perhaps the talk going on the Patreon, the Hever Castle Patreon, and also I might be able to share some stuff through Tudor Society membership as well. And I'm really hoping Owen and I are going to be doing stuff throughout the day as well. I'm just really hoping that we'll be able to do something, do some videoing or do some lives or something throughout the day. You never know, we might get a chance. Thank you for listening, and thank you for supporting me in the work I do and supporting this channel. I will see you very soon. Take care, stay safe. See you soon. Bye-bye.